Welcome back to Energetically You, the podcast where we talk all things integrated wellness, abundant mindset, and wellpreneurship. I am your host, Megan Swan, an integrated wellness and business coach, specializing in helping high-performance women optimize their wellness so that they can have magnetic energy, confidence from within to make more empowered decisions. Today, I have a very special guest. I'm honestly so excited, a little bit nervous, but absolutely thrilled and honored that Nivi Jaswal has agreed to come on the show. She is a powerhouse of knowledge, diverse personal global experience and perspectives, and she's here to enlighten us today. We're going to be talking about intersectionality, veganism, and the divine feminine. And let me tell you, it was kind of hard to narrow down our topic because she is just an absolute wealth of knowledge on so many really interesting topics that I love to chat about. But that is what we came down to. I'll briefly read her bio. Nivi Jaswal is an intersectional vegan advocate and social entrepreneur in Boston, Massachusetts. She founded the Versa Foundation, a non-for-profit, and the JIVINITI Research Program after healing herself on a whole food, plant-based lifestyle. In addition to holding a BA in psychology and sociology and an MBA in consumer behavior marketing and an extensive international corporate experience in the consumer packaged goods, medical devices, and media and research sectors, Nivi is a national board certified health and wellness coach trained at the Mayo Clinic. She is passionate about developing creative, multidisciplinary, intersectional content and designing unique research collaborations aimed at communities of color in the US and South Asia and elsewhere. So as you can see, she is a very amazing woman. I can't wait to pick her brain. So as in a few moments, we're going to dive right in. Welcome, Nivi. I'm just so honored that you accepted the invitation to be on the show, and I'm so excited for this conversation. I was sharing with the audience that it was a little bit difficult to narrow down exactly what we're going to limit the conversation to, partly because I'm just a person that loves to speak in tangents and I can get really all over the place quite quickly. But so let's dive in first with how are you? And I really wanted to know as much as you wanted to share with us, your personal journey to really becoming very passionate about being whole food plant-based.
Thank you so much, Megan. And I really appreciate you having me here for this, conversation. To start with, I have a corporate background and I started in the consumer packaged goods industry in marketing and brand management. I moved to the medical devices industry after that and, media and research. And all this time I was, a proteinaholic, workaholic, meataholic, all of those holics all combined. And I believed that animal protein was really important for our health and especially for women's health because we needed to protect our bones. And, animal protein derived from dairy was an important component of that nutrition for me. And I was following keto. And it was under a clinically supervised protocol, no less. And it actually drove me towards chronic illnesses that I, in the first place, was seeking to prevent and which ran in my family. And I initially felt they were part of my genetic destiny. So in 2015, I had a series of diagnoses and it prompted me to take a break from the corporate world. And I assumed it was stress because I was flying around and 50% of the month, it was quite a busy time from a business travel standpoint. Slowly, it took me about 3 years to unlearn what I had learned my entire life about the need for animal-derived products in our nutrition. And I chanced upon, and nobody should have to stumble upon this wisdom, honestly, but I chanced upon various books, including the China study written by Dr. T. Colin Campbell. I watched the documentaries that have since become really popular. Forks Over Knives, Game Changer came out in 2019, and so on. And I was really motivated to give it a shot. I was like, okay, it seems like the science is behind it, as much as I believe the science was behind ketogenic and paleo and all of that. And I had nothing to lose, given the diagnoses, except to just fulfill my genetic destiny and, become a full-time diabetic and identify myself as a patient, a label that I didn't identify with. And so in April 2018, I went whole food, plant-based, oil-free. So I chose to follow the therapeutic protocol suggested by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn Jr. And he developed this protocol when he was still at the Cleveland Clinic. And 6 to 8 months later, by spring of 2019, I had a clean chit from the doctors. So that's my story of going from a carnistic, meat-loving, keto, corporate, business travel sort of a person, and that identity, and my transition to eating more mindfully and naturally.
Well, I want to ask you about intersectionality and what it has to do with veganism. But before we go there, can you touch a little bit more on sort of like the personal reflections on, where was it hard to make that shift? And then what did you notice on a physical, energetic, and maybe spiritual level when you did make those changes?
Right. And that's a very important question, about transition. There is no one answer, and there isn't a simple answer, because we're talking about transitions not just from one nutritional paradigm to the other, or one way of looking at the world to the other, and redefining literally our value system from ground up. And I mean that both metaphorically and literally, because when we're eating and consuming violence that has been perpetrated upon animals, birds, and other living beings, we're not living on the ground. We're not really grounded in our root chakra. It's the first chakra problem to be a carnistic person and to survive in the world. My transition nutritionally was dependent on the prerequisite of, what does the science have to say about this? And I have been very evidence-based in the first half of my life, in terms of, what does the science tell us? What do the numbers tell us? Do we have the statistics for this? Do we have the data for this? Which again is a very divine masculine, structured, organized sort of a way of, leading life and making certain choices. And the world seems to reward that, whether you're a man or a woman, and or identify with a different gender. So the nutritional switch was overnight, when I felt that, hey, all of these lifestyle medicine professionals are talking about it. There are before, after transformations, and I want it for myself because I was in pain and I was suffering. The spiritual transition took a while, and that didn't occur actually until 2 years later, more than 2 years later. So in April of 2018, I went whole food, plant-based, oil-free. In August of 2020, I was sort of swimming very close to what I considered were dangerous, militant waters of veganism. And I didn't want to touch them. It was almost like it had a lure. There's a magnetism to being this activist persona. And once you enter the plant-based world, nutritionally, even for health reasons, you can't but not be touched by these, this vibrating, vibrant, women-led movement that veganism is. And I had an encounter with Victoria Moran, who runs Main Street Vegan Academy out of New York City, and she's just amazing. She is the grandmother and divine feminine personification of compassion as an ethic and of veganism. And she's been vegan for like over 50 years. So it's
Wow.
awesome. You know, she's in her mid-70s at this point in time. And I was at a speaking engagement. She was there, and she and I got talking. And she said, "Hey, you've got to attend the Main Street Vegan Academy, and continue with your education, because you've entered this plant-based world." And I was like, yeah, okay, veganism, let's see. So August 2020, it was during one of the sessions that she had curated, and a very prominent vegan activist who is just somebody who I really admire. Her name is Jasmine Singer, and she happened to be talking about storytelling and carnism, and recounting episodes and interactions and encounters we in the class may have had as individuals with the animal world. And I don't know, this is the power of storytelling, and tapping into the power and the realm of the myth. We carry so many myths and memories inside of us, and when somebody just nudges and pokes at them, it can create some very profound, transformational moments. And that's exactly what happened on that, summer of 2020. And I ended up recounting a specific episode of where I had witnessed the slaughtering of a cow in Indonesia. I was in Jakarta, and I was at work. I was being driven to work. And I looked at it, and it was, obviously the animal was in distress. It had a huge crowd surrounding the entire situation, and it was a spectacle because the crowd was cheering as the knife was put to the animal's neck. The car was moving very slowly, and every single time I recall this incident, as I'm doing right now, our memories are fundamentally flawed, because when we reconstitute all of those frames and bring them back, they always appear in a very different color and hue, and as I recalled it during Jasmine's session in the summer of 2020, I had goosebumps, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my goodness, what did I do after witnessing this? Like, I'm trying to jog my memory, and I realized we snaked in and out of that traffic. I reached work, quickly filed it away in my memory, forgetting it for the next, 15 years. And later that night, I remember going to a very expensive steakhouse. And, with my team, and this is how dissociated and how disconnected I was retrospectively with my carnism. And in that one moment, Megan, from being a whole food plant-based person who would come in purely with the selfish motive of reversing or addressing my own illness, I was sort of anointed and appointed into the cause of veganism.
Do you want to go to talk about, was this essentially the seed for your organization, this whole experience? Or was that sort of like already on your radar to start something like that?
So the seeds for the Versa Foundation, which is the nonprofit, based out of the Boston area that I run, were actually sown in 2016. And in September 2016, I started, an executive education program at Stanford. It was hybrid, so I didn't necessarily have to be in Palo Alto. And I was participating, and now that I think of it, in an elective on storytelling, led by Professor Jennifer Acker, whom I have huge respect for. She's very well known in marketing and in the industry, and she's written about the power of levity and humor in storytelling and in leadership, and inclusive leadership, and how women can bring that, tap into the power of levity and humor, and so on. So part of that course was a call to action about how do you create an idea and take it to the community. And back then I wasn't vegan, and I wasn't even plant-based. So, and I was in a sabbatical, and I knew what I knew at the time, which was business and the world of economic empowerment and microcredit facilities, going to rural, areas. So I chose to go back to my own community. I'm a Punjabi from the northwestern part of India. And I thought that it would be great if I could go back and help the rural women artisans over there. I love color. I love fabric and textures and all the bells and whistles and mirrors, that are part of, my culture, and the fabrics and adornments and accessories that women wear. And it's just incredibly beautiful. So I was interested to bring this, idea of digital marketplace to these women. It wasn't until 2018 that I incorporated that into a formal, organization. And as my own journey began, I started exploring and I started wondering and being very curious about what was the baseline health status of these women, and how they say that, you set about trying to do something where you feel like you can rescue other people, but exactly who you set out to rescue sometimes rescues you right back. And so I credit a lot of my journey into wellness and veganism and whole food plant-based and the whole healing journey to those women. And by the time it was 2018, early 2019, as I was experimenting with plant-based eating and finding benefit, I wanted to bring that part of the story more and more to them, and really not being this, doing this savior act of, here I am paratrooping into your rural life, and I'm going to take your wares and sell them for, 10 times over, and I'll share the profit, which is a tried and tested international development revenue model, which has been used by small entities to some really large, globally renowned brands. But it's very difficult to sort of migrate to saying, I'm just going to empower you to be able to get more for what you're doing. And how do you do that? One of the ways to do that is to ensure that people feel healthy and that their metabolic, rate of aging isn't completely blown out of proportion for, their actual chronological age. And what I mean by that, Megan, is women, some of these remote, rural artisans, even in their late 20s or early 30s or like early 40s, they looked outwardly as though they were in their like early 60s. I kid you not. That's the impact of a low quality of life, a malnutrition of a totally different level, and stress, and the situation of being indebted, and also surrounded by the patriarchy, and not having your own voice, and fertility issues, but it's taboo for them to talk about it, and so on. So the minute I kind of touched those waters of, let's bring wellness to these women, it seemed as though, and my mother was on this journey with me too, she's an anthropologist, so Mom and I, we felt like we'd opened this Pandora's box, where all of a sudden, in the temple kitchen, where we were holding these whole food, plant-based, dairy-free, oil-free culinary demonstrations for these women, that, this frequently some of these women would kind of like huddle, they'd have a little talk with each other, and one of them would dare to sort of approach us and start talking about, well, you know what, I'm going through this and I haven't had my period for like 3 months and I know I'm not pregnant. What might be going on? And that's where, I started thinking that, oh my goodness, it is not just about nutrition, it is about systemically, socioculturally built-in disadvantages and inequity that women end up experiencing that completely shuts off their voice and prevents them from, voicing healthcare needs or even self-esteem needs or other things. And obviously we're getting into reproductive rights, which is, a topic that's of a huge concern at this point in time, even in the United States. I mean, the past weekend has been tumultuous, to say the least, and very tragic. this long-winded answer that I have to your question is that the nonprofit also had a journey that mirrored much of my own in that sense.
Mm.
And starting with the women in Northwest India to the behavioral research work that we do now, mostly focused in the United States on women, women of color, low-income women, regardless of their color. All of that, mimics and mirrors the healing journey that I've been on.
Yeah. Well, I love how you keep bringing storytelling back into the conversation. I don't know if have heard of the poet Ocean Vuong. I was listening to him on Being, and he was telling this beautiful story about his childhood and how he was raised by Buddhist women in his family. They were all illiterate, but he was talking about how the rituals of Buddhism were sort of thread into his life, and how important, like everything he learned as a writer and as an artist is really from these women and the stories that they used to tell him, and how I loved how he talked about, that we embody stories, and that there's this huge disconnection in the current sphere that, we're increasingly disconnected from the words we use, from the stories we tell, and really like not valuing the more traditional or simple ways that these things are passed on as being like somehow less important. And in fact, it's more important, I don't know if that speaks to you.
Oh, absolutely, it does. I'm a big fan of Vaughn's work as well, and equally that of Max Muller's when it comes to mythology, and also Carl Jung, who is considered one of the fathers of analytical psychology. And all of these, individuals and thinkers, including some of the more recent thinkers like, Carol J. Adams, a woman, vegan activist in her own right, somebody who's written about ecofeminism, and she's much more contemporary to the world that, we're in, because one of the, ways to sort of look at ritual and the power of ritual is that it offers, coming of age. There are these coming of age rituals since times immemorial in ancient societies that have been used to pass on wisdom orally, mm-hmm. or through weavings or embroidered motifs and fabrics, because all of those accessories tell a story. And mm-hmm. and it's very interesting that you bring it up, because the artisans that we started working with in Punjab were Fulkari artisans, and Fulkari is a very specific embroidery tradition where it is specifically made for the daughter when she's born by the mother. And what I know historically is that the Fulkari for the girl, the daughter, will actually be initiated on the day that she's born. And mm-hmm. by the time she's ready to be married off, in mm-hmm. in a very traditional context, the mother started to sort of weave in all the stories that the mother, the grandmothers on both sides, the aunts on either sides, are encountering in their life. And some of those motifs and, those ideas are woven into and embroidered into the shawl that would be part of her trousseau. So that is really the beginning of that artisanal work. And I know that lots and lots of cultures that continue to invest in their heritage, including the country where you're based in at this point, Megan, have so many amazing rites and rituals still intact, and mm-hmm. unfortunately they're declining a lot. However, the way in which they're still intact it gives me some hope, for our world that's caught in this dissociation, unrealistic virtual reality of the, shall I say, metaverse, where, our children increasingly, people, the younger people who are digital natives, are encountering mental health issues because they have trouble just associating with another human being. And honestly, our technology has hijacked the dopamine mechanisms and the serotonin mechanisms that are, inherent in our body, that are stimulated by the practice of ritual and by listening to stories, bedtime stories or ritualistic stories or fables or folk tales, all of that folklore. And typically the burden of this sort of was heavily on the women in the tribe. It was up to the tribal, amongst the tribal elders, for the woman to really be the custodian of that folklore, of the songs that were sung and of the poetry that was written, because the men were out doing what they were doing, in a typical gatherer-hunter sort of a paradigm. When we talk about, and let me know if you're okay for me to sort of segue into the whole intersectionality, veganism, ecofeminism bit.
Yeah, please. I just wanted to say, I think another great source of story are recipes, right? Like the culinary magic of your culture, for example, is just so deep and, spiritual. There's just so many layers to the, lots of the dishes that anyone can taste outside of India, but of course there's many that don't, arrive to Indian restaurants exactly. And I'm sure that that's part of the knowledge and the storytelling that you got from these women.
Oh, absolutely. I am just so, fascinated with plant-based wisdom in ancient foodways and ancient culinary traditions, which have been contaminated by this whole animalistic, carnistic sort of thinking, and just sort of this reductive, macro-based thinking that I need my carbs and I need my protein and I need my fats, because that doesn't have any juice to it. It's
any soul.
Yeah, any soul to it. What are you eating again? Here's a spoonful of carbs and here's 2 spoonfuls of fat. Human beings and our sensory system doesn't work like this. And once again, the aside from the biological honor and privilege of reproduction and bringing life to earth, and women being the custodians of that, or females being the custodians of that, females have also been the custodians of how do you put together an aggregate all the plant-based wisdom and the ingredients and the herbs and even flowers, that might be available in your vicinity, locally, seasonally, right?
The medicine
of it all, right? It's a medicine for not just your body, but also for your soul, for your energy body. And a lot has been obviously written about it in both ancient, Eastern and Western cultures. Obviously, the South Asian culture has a very specific ethnic, way of cooking our food. And I was dissociated from that too. During my keto time, I was doing boiled chicken, and I was using this really sensitive kitchen counter weighing scale to measure my net carbs so I could add it to the app. And so I achieve my protein goal of the day, and I don't do carb. I was carb shunning. And I didn't realize that along with closing that door, I had also closed the door on this amazing, diversified, medicinal, plant-based wisdom that was part of my own roots. So if we were to sort of say that or paraphrase that in spiritual terms, by following this keto, carnistic, nutritional and health paradigm, I had cut off my grounding and I had seriously compromised my own root chakra. And we know what happens when we do that as individuals, when we do that as a collective, when we do that at a large scale. our systems do not then have the right foundation, and they have an imbalanced foundation. And the root chakra is nothing but the big, awesome door to receive that wisdom from the earth goddess, the divine feminine energy. It's the Kundalini, as it's, spoken of and called in so many, in yogic traditions. And in Celtic traditions, there are other names given to it. It is that, the place from which we derive our fertility and the fertility of our ideas. And then coming down, from the top, from our crown chakra, is the cosmic energy, which one can, speak of in terms of the masculine energy. But if all that our society is, and including females of our kind, if we're just soaked in the masculine energy, and the only models and forms of leadership and ways of moving and being and dancing in the world we know of are distinctly masculine or alpha male codes, and that's all that we lean on, then no wonder we've got situations of extreme, pandemics, not just that of COVID-19, but also public health and planetary health at this point in time, because we're cut off from our root chakra if we're not dipping into that plant-based wisdom, those ancient foodways and ritual and storytelling that you referred to.
Yeah. And of course, when we're off balance on that, in a sense, whether you want to take it spiritually or literally, we're ungrounded, it's so much easier for us to be influenced by status quo, right? Like just to be less connected to the bigger picture of the daily decisions that we're making. So yeah, let's dive into where we wanted to hone this conversation. I think it's perfect time to get your take on intersectionality in general, why it's so important to veganism and ecofeminism.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that question. Intersectionality has just so many different definitions depending on the podcast you listen to or the book you read, and depending on what Dr. Google throws up and so on. The way I understand intersectionality is very literally, it's the interconnectedness of all these different social categories that we ourselves as individuals are immersed in. And these social categories are that of race and class and gender. And intersectionality specifically sort of regards the overlaps of race, class, gender, and it focuses on some of the independent systems that arise from those overlaps. And mostly when we look at those systems, they tell us a lot about the characteristics of inequity or disadvantage or discrimination that we experience, either as a function of our race or a function of our class or a function of our gender. So that, to me, is what intersectionality really is. Now, when we look at ecofeminism, that's a branch of feminism. It's a sub-branch of feminism, feministic thinking, and it's indeed a part of political ecology. And ecofeminist thinkers look at the human relationship with nature at large through the lens of gender.
Mm-hmm.
So having established these 2 points, where there's ecofeminism that is looking at what is our relationship with nature, and what is the relationship of nature when we look at it through the lens of the divine feminine, and when we look at intersectionality as to how disadvantaged, how discriminated against is the divine feminine. When you combine both of those things together, it becomes a complex and a heady mixture of ecofeministic intersectionality that becomes very difficult, to divorce it from the word or the concept of veganism, because veganism is indeed about going back and looking at how our current relationship with nature is and retraining ourselves to be more connected with nature. So in my view, intersectionality, ecofeminism, veganism, they're almost like this holy trinity, very powerful, that is capable of allowing not just women, but masculine allies of females and women out there who would want to come together and really elevate our collective consciousness. And if we don't do that on an urgent, basis, we already know that we've reached planetary boundaries. We know climate change is a reality. We know there's completely eccentric, never heard of climate disasters that are underway at this point in time. We need global warming to be curtailed below, plus 2 degrees Celsius. And it's already wreaking havoc. Some places have wildfires and some places have flash floods. And it's incredible how much we've upset Mother Nature. And it is, some scholars already argue it's a point of no return. If you listen to the work at, some of the foundations, there's one nonprofit that I particularly follow. They're called 50 by 40. They're out of Canada, and they've done a lot of farmer transition work and climate change work, climate reconstruction work, and so on. And they're vegan too. So, and they believe in intersectionality. Once again, when you look at the farmers, when you look at agricultural workers, predominantly agricultural workers tend to be women, especially in the global South. So there you go. You're checking all the different boxes. You've got women. They're defined by their race, their class, the country where they belong. And they've been incorporated into being agricultural workers in poultry farms, in dairy farms. In fact, the other day we, at our nonprofit, we put out a very pertinent, article on how dairy farmers have been incorporated into thinking that they are bringing nourishment to children and that they're helping moms out there with a critical component for their child's nutrition, without which they wouldn't be good moms. And they, so the pitch that these modern day toxic food systems that we've, created, the pitch that they make to females of our species is just incredibly sinister, because effectively it's female on female violence if you look at a female agricultural worker then having to artificially inseminate the female of another species, in this case a cow, or to bind a mother hog in a gestation crate that is so small that she can barely move, or the pitch that we make to agricultural workers in the honey industry, where the queen bee's wings are clipped so she can't go anywhere, or even in aquaculture, where female shrimps receive eye stalk ablation to spur them into greater reproductive abilities, which is completely unnatural for them. So you're literally hijacking the divine feminine forces and energies present in the world, in some cases using human females to participate in that supply chain of torture, all in the name of food. And food that is supremely unnatural for our species in the first place.
Can you paint, using this lens, can we paint a little bit of the historical picture of how the masculine has dominated the stories we tell ourselves about, global poverty, nutrition, all of these things that we feel like it's somehow justified and necessary, essential even, that these systems exist, because if not, we'd all be starving, or if not, to your point, there wouldn't be enough of these essential ingredients for someone's child. Obviously, all of these narratives are fundamentally flawed. And I loved in the talk that you made, Gatherers Over Hunters, the archetypes that you developed there. I know we don't really have time to go into all of them, but you kind of paint the picture of, because I'm sure most people, for example, have no idea that the military has anything to do with food research or the food innovation, which has led us to the fast food industry.
Yeah. Well, thank you for referring to those archetypes. There are 10 of them. And, I'm preparing a separate sort of a position paper on that, which I expect to have, ready on our website soon. For those of your, amongst your audience who might be interested to delve deeper. So let's picture this. Picture that it's like 5,000, 10,000, 15, 50,000 years ago. And we're back in the primitive times, it's, pre-Neolithic times. And we see a tribe, we come upon this human tribe. And women are cooking or gathering tubers and herbs and other nuts and seeds that they can find. But a small band of men, males of our species, have come together and they're in a team huddle and they're setting out for the hunt. Hunting was a very, very difficult proposition back in the day because we don't have claws and we don't have fur and we don't have, all the necessary things physically to be able to fight off, large livestock. Well, livestock is a word, agrarian term, or large bovine, mammals or any other, deer or other thing that humans might be interested in hunting. And also what we're interested in hunting, there are other carnivorous predators out in the jungle that are also interested in hunting exactly those prey. So there was a lot of ceremony and ritual and chest thumping about, dude, bro, we're going to do this and we have to succeed and we have to make a song about this and do a song and dance about this because, we're going to war. We might not be able to come back. And if we don't get back, all of these women and kids are going to starve. Well, actually, they were not going to be starving. If they die, they were more likely to die of infectious diseases than of diabetes 10,000 years ago or longer before that. But all of that ritual and ceremony was really important for them to do because it was a high risk proposition, which is why we find all of this scribbled in the form of cave paintings. We've never seen a cave painting where a woman, primordial woman or women are shown gathering mangoes from mango orchards or trees. We always show men fighting for that prize, for the thing. So when we look at our history and when we listen over and over through Hollywood or our media or through history books or through our, oral traditions in our separate microcultures where we grow up, that it was the hunter that led to mankind and note the vocabulary on that, that for mankind to have reached all these advances, and it wouldn't have happened if man had not hunted and, become the paragon of animals. And when I talk about paragon of animals, I obviously refer to the whole dominionistic ideology as well that, some large faiths in the world sort of ascribe to. And that hunter-gatherer paradigm is a fallacy. When we actually look into archaeological records, more and more of these technological advances offer us a way to look into the genetics and the DNA of what ancient men and women used to eat. When we look deep into evolutionary epidemiology or evolutionary history, evolutionary paleoarchaeology, when we look into some of those, some of that research that seems to be coming out, it sounds as though human beings, no matter where they lived on planet Earth, before the big migrations that happened to the global north and the upper latitudes, because those were largely uninhabitable. We're mostly a tropical species and a temperate species because we need warmth to survive. When we look at some of that history, we know it's actually the gatherer-hunter paradigm versus the hunter-gatherer. Now, if we're all socialized into thinking, no, primitive man lived in caves, ate meat, hunted animals, we're going with that rallying cry, rah, 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 warring mentality, and cut to today, modern history, when we look at most recent geopolitics, we see that the World War I and the World War II have really critically shaped our food system and our foodways. And how do we do that? Information is out in the public domain. The US military, to take one example, and not to say that other militaries in other armed forces in the world haven't followed the same approach, but the US military, to be specific, are actually the largest spenders of research into food and food technology and food preservation technology for some various, obvious reasons in the world at this point in time. Their R&D budget for developing, extra long shelf life on pizza for troops that are deployed far and wide. I mean, just that R&D budget would put a lot of, international development and, hunger relief projects and their budgets to shame. Mm-hmm. And when wars end, the technology that has been created or the supply chain that has been created needs to find somewhere to go. And that's how we have chicken nuggets at this point in time. That's how we got Spam. That's how a lot of those initial military-related food innovations were socialized into consumers, into the consumer realm, giving rise to TV dinners initially, and also sort of appropriating the women's liberation movement to say, well, if you're a working mom and if you have to step outside of your home, you still have to feed your family, and here you go. There's convenience food and there's TV dinners for that and so on. So when you look at history and the role that these masculine systems have played, masculinity, military, this whole idea of we're warring, and to create a sense of scarcity and move away from the paradigm of abundance. So when you create that scarcity, and you create emotion around that scarcity, and you create a structure and a system that seems to offer a remedy for that scarcity, we all get socialized and incorporated into thinking that this is the only way. Oh my God, this is the only way. Money is the only way. If I don't have money and capital markets, if capital markets collapse, we're going to collapse. Even the word capital comes from head of cattle. That's how deep the irony goes when masculine forces outweigh the feminine voice. And so the idea is not to shoot the masculine forces down or to adopt the same boring vocabulary or approach, but really is to bring it back in a balance and say, can we together come to the table and have a conversation and vote with our voices and with our money and with our resources for things that actually matter? Because honestly, Mother Nature is going to survive and planet Earth is going to survive as long as our, sun, the star that feeds us, is there. If we don't, bring this balance into being, the survival that's threatened the most is that of our own species. Mm-hmm. So it's selfish not to want to bring that balance between the masculine forces and the feminine forces to come to bear. And that would really make us civilized. That would be the hallmark of civilization versus, getting embattled about whether I belong to this great civilization, therefore I have a right to go and invade your country or not, which is, still continuing in the
current paradigm. Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. So let's shift to how we met. I saw a really incredible post that I just found so inspiring on LinkedIn, and I revisited it just yesterday and can't believe the massive traction and impact. I'm sure you're receiving so much feedback. But it was just, a picture of you in a beautiful sari and your explanation and storytelling of a situation where I think most women can immediately connect with, where you were in a situation where you had to, grin and bear it, essentially. And when these things happen to us, sometimes we never really process it. Other times it can take years or, and then, so what I loved about the post is it's also the storytelling. It's the reality. If we don't share these stories, we're all keeping each other quiet in this system that we were just discussing. So what do you want to share with us about that post, and maybe some interesting feedback that you've had? I'm sure it's been mostly positive, but let us know.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, I'm so grateful for the social media algorithm that actually brought us together. And so in that sense, this podcast, this conversation, getting to know you and about your work is a perfect example of the positive impact of how posts that receive this sort of, attraction and scale can deliver to, and what voicing one's voice, albeit so many years later, can actually bring. It's brought the two of us together. It has brought so many other women closer to me too, from my own home country, as well as to women here in the US who, and so whether they're South Asian or not, because it does strike a chord with them. So the post actually refers to 3 separate incidents that happened. One close to 10 years ago, another about 5 years ago, and another more recently, about 5 months ago. And so it goes to show that, things change and things sometimes,
also don't.
And I'm like, seriously, are we still in the same paradigm? And it was pretty interesting because when I posted it, I didn't set out to make my post viral. It's a phenomenon that, you and I both know is completely out of our control. I was in a moment of disbelief and disillusionment with what happened most recently, where a climate change guru reached out to me on LinkedIn, and they offered to collaborate over a documentary. So I met with them through, LinkedIn, and we had a Zoom meeting, and they opened with, "I'd love to have your pretty face on the documentary." And I was, shocked. And I was like, okay, so is there anything more that you would want me to contribute towards the documentary? Nope, it's like, "You're so pretty, we just want to have you on it." And I'm like, you know what? I've participated in the media, advertising, communications world, and there are talent agencies out there, and there are, far prettier women, for the right role and the character and the right plot and so on, for the right storyline. You could have so many different people to audition. And, but, why me? And this person sort of didn't have, their logic just didn't have much legs to stand on. And so I was in a state of shock, and this happened, some months ago. And then before that, it was all about, oh, you're going to India for a wedding. I know people might force you or suggest that you wear henna on your hands, but listen, you're in an important client role with this huge organization, and it may not be construed as professional. And then the first, anecdote was from one of my supervisors, who blatantly had, he became very upset upon looking at my nail paint, and he seemed to suggest it was completely inappropriate for the workplace. So, the importance of voicing all of these things, any of these things that we experience as women, whether we're working or whether we're not working, there's this ever-present need somehow that we all get socialized into of validation. And even when we're not looking for validation proactively, it seems that it's offered in the form of labels, and it's offered in the form of shoulds and should nots, do's and do nots, and also these definitions of what makes a good girl, what makes a good woman, what makes a good wife, a good sister, a good daughter, a good daughter-in-law. And that's a lot of pressure. And I feel that in having just some of that pressure out on LinkedIn, that it resonated with so many women, and the kind of, messages that I've received from women saying, the other day there was this one, obviously I'm going to share it anonymously, where she said, I was offered a job, and at the same time they proceeded to tell me about the dress code, and I remembered your post, and I'm choosing to say no. I don't even want to go and work for such an employer. That example of a private message that was sent to me where one person says that they made a different decision than they probably would have, that says a lot. And I was so moved when I saw that message. And then on the other side, there have been other messages where they range from blatant propositioning, to saying things like, you look stunning in a sari. Please also change your profile picture to one where you're wearing a sari if you're a true Indian. And I'm like, precisely, thank you for mansplaining my choices of my profile picture on a social media platform. Thanks, but no thanks. So, there's inspiration, and then there's also evidence of how things continue to be, pretty much the same.
Exactly the same. And just for context, those 3 stories did not all happen in the US. I mean, they happened all over the world. It was, this isn't like a Western problem.
And one of those stories happened in the US, one happened in Europe, and the other happened in Asia. So, with the exception of the Latin America, I think we've covered, all the other places. So it goes to show how pervasive, and just, if I'm the only data point of, T equals N equals 1, how pervasive the issues are.
Well, I think we could talk for another hour, but I really want to wrap it up so that it is wrapped up beautifully with a nice little bow, if you will. I wanted to quickly just say that I've been diving into your podcast, Connecting the Dots, and I wanted to just briefly touch on the current organization that you are focusing on, JIVINITI Program, in terms of the advocacy and the content creation and the behavioral research that you're doing, and anything else you want to mention to the audience in ways they can connect with you.
Sure. So please check us out on Instagram and on LinkedIn. We're at JIVINITI and JIVINITI Research on LinkedIn. JIVINITI is a platform that exists, on my the parent nonprofit, which is called the Versa Foundation. And JIVINITI is just such a beautiful concept. Actually, it's a composite word made up of Jiv and Niti. Jiv is the Sanskrit root for life and aliveness, and then Niti is again the Sanskrit word or root for method or way or path. So the path towards being alive is what that platform is all about. We do 3 things, as you've mentioned already. I run a monthly podcast. It's broadcast on Jane Unchained News Network, which is also Unchained TV. It is actually the world's first animal rights and environmentalism and veganism focused TV channel, and it's available on Apple TV. We also do consumer advocacy. We want to have it be anchored in evidence-based science. So I conduct public health research. The latest project that we're working on is understanding the COVID-19 impact on Americans' physical and mental health, and looking at it through their dietary patterns. So we're looking at both people who continue to eat animals and people who eat clean and choose plants, and how might their experience have differed. And if it's different, and hopefully it is, as I think, you and I both
we all know.
Yeah, but it would be interesting to be able to find some science and numbers to back that up as well.
Curious to see what your research comes up with, because it's a deep hunch.
Yeah, we're excited about it as well. And yeah, it has been challenging to bring together the village that it has needed to, produce this sort of research, to collect the data, because a lot of mainstream organizations are uncomfortable touching these questions. So we have some very courageous people who, throughout the different phases of such research, who have come forward to help. And I'm immensely grateful, because we can't do this by ourselves. And, the work that you do, you can't just do it just entirely by yourself. It needs a community to come together and support you, and to come together and support, me and my work as well. So I thank you so much for, having me here and giving me an opportunity to talk about my work and my ideas on what's happening in the world.
Well, thank you so much, Nivi. It's been a true honor. And I really enjoy this conversation, and I look forward to following your work. Is there any one last little snippet of hope you want to leave us with?
Well, the only thing that I will say is find your voice. It's incredibly important for women to continue to support not just others, because we do that anyway. We're socialized into doing that anyway, looking after others. But the minute we don the oxygen mask ourselves and we express ourselves, no matter how it is, we express ourselves towards, with health, our own self-care, healthcare, or towards, our hobbies and interests and other forms of creative expression like art and music and singing and dance. And you don't have to do it formally. Go sing in the rain the next time it rains. Find your medium, because you never know, it might be your medicine. That's what I would say.
Beautiful. We'll leave it right there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.